The city of Havenwood was a labyrinth of steel and shadow. But tonight, it was an art piece sculpted in stark, monochrome lines by the relentless January snow. Each snowflake was a pinprick of light against the city's grim facade. But on the streets, they were a shroud, a blanket of cold silence. The wind howled a low, mournful tune through the narrow gaps between buildings. Biting at any warmth that dared to linger, police officer Jack Corbin felt the cold in his bones. A familiar ache that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a cold that had settled deep inside him years ago and refused to leave. He drove his patrol car with a practiced, almost robotic precision, his gaze sweeping over the deserted streets. He was a man carved from stoicism, his features sharp, his eyes the color of a winter sky gray and distant. To his colleagues, he was the consummately professional cop, a man of few words and unflappable resolve, a man who, they whispered, had been irrevocably changed by some private sorrow. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Atlas. Atlas was a German shepherd, a marvel of a police dog. His coat was a deep, rich sable, his ears a perfect pair of alert triangles. He was all muscle and keen intelligence, a creature of purpose and discipline. But more than that, Atlas was Jack's partner, his shadow, his only true confidant. Atlas's presence was a steady, warm weight in the cold, hollow space Jack inhabited. The dog was trained for search and rescue, for tracking and detection, and his instincts were a legend within the precinct. He was more than a tool, he was an extension of Jack himself. They were on a routine patrol, a quiet night shift that promised nothing but the biting wind and the endless flurries. Jack was counting the minutes until his shift ended, dreaming of the empty silence of his apartment and the faint, comforting sounds of Atlas settling down on his dog bed. But then, Atlas shifted. The dog's ears swiveled, no longer scanning the street ahead. His body tensed, a low, barely audible rumble coming from his chest. He whined softly, a sound so out of character for the usually silent K9 that Jack's hand instinctively tightened on the steering wheel. Atlas began to pull, his powerful form straining against the soft leather of his harness. He wasn't just agitated, he was insistent. His nose was pressed to the window, sniffing the air with a frantic urgency that Jack had never seen before. "Easy, boy, what is it?" Jack muttered, his voice a low, soothing rasp. Atlas whined again, then let out a sharp, demanding bark. His eyes locked on a narrow alleyway between a shuttered bakery and a condemned apartment building. The alley was a canyon of trash cans and deep shadows, a place where the wind gathered and swirled with a malicious intent. Jack knew this alley. It was a dead end, a notorious spot for late-night drug deals and discarded lives. Nothing good ever happened there. Jack pulled the car to the curb, the crunch of the tires on packed snow, a harsh punctuation in the quiet night. He was annoyed. This was a pointless distraction. It was probably just a stray cat or a raccoon. But Atlas's conviction was absolute. Jack couldn't ignore it. The unspoken rule between them was that when Atlas was this certain, you listened. He unclipped the leash, and Atlas shot out of the car, pulling him along with a force that surprised him. They moved in a clumsy tandem, Jack struggling to keep his footing on the slick pavement. Atlas was on a mission, his pace quick, his head low, sniffing the frigid air with an intensity that was both a marvel and a puzzle. They plunged into the alley's deep shadows. The air grew colder, the wind more vicious, carrying the sour stench of decay and neglect. Jack's flashlight beam cut a swathe through the darkness, illuminating discarded boxes, overflowing garbage bags, and slick puddles of black ice. Atlas was no longer just sniffing, he was tracking, his powerful strides purposeful. He wasn't just following a scent, he was following a trail, a narrative only he could read. Atlas suddenly stopped, his body rigid, his nose pointed at a large pile of cardboard and what looked like old, stained blankets wedged behind a rusty dumpster. He began to whimper, a high-pitched, mournful sound that tore at something inside Jack. It was a sound of distress, of profound sadness, a sound that spoke of a broken heart. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, his own heart starting to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm. The dog was no longer the focused, professional canine. He was a creature of raw emotion. Atlas whimpered again, then began to gently paw at the edge of the blanket bundle, his movements careful, almost tender, with a growing sense of dread. Jack approached. He knelt down in the filthy snow. His flashlight beam focused on the bundle. He reached out a gloved hand and pushed aside a corner of the blanket. He saw a small, pale face, a tiny head covered with a cheap, knitted cap. The face was so small, so impossibly delicate. That, for a moment. Jack's mind couldn't process it. Then a whimper, a soft, thin cry that was barely audible above the wind's howl. It was a baby. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He felt a wave of shock so profound it was physical. He had seen a lot of terrible things in his years on the force accidents, crimes, the aftermath of violence. But this was a different kind of horror. A small, innocent life, left to freeze in the bitter cold. He shoved the rest of the blankets aside, revealing the full bundle. The baby was swaddled tightly in a thin, worn-out blanket, its tiny hands curled into fists, its lips a shade of blue that spoke of a dangerous, bone-deep chill. Jack gently reached out. His hand trembling, he could feel the baby's body, cold as marble, and a terror unlike anything he had ever known seized him. He had to act. Now, he fumbled for his radio, his mind a jumble of static and disbelief. "Dispatch, this is Officer Corbin. I need an ambulance at the corner of Grant and 3rd, the alley behind the old bakery, and I need them fast. I have an infant here, abandoned, hypothermia, unresponsive." His voice, usually so steady and calm, was strained. The words clipped and urgent. As he spoke, he carefully, tenderly lifted the baby into his arms. The tiny body was so fragile, so vulnerable. He cradled the infant against his chest. Trying to share what little warmth he had, he held it close, trying to shield it from the biting wind. The baby's whimper was no more than a breath of sound, a fragile protest against a cruel world. Atlas sat back on his haunches, his gaze fixed on the baby. He wasn't barking or pulling, he was just watching. A silent, unblinking vigil. Jack looked at the dog, at his partner, and for the first time in years, a well of emotion he had long thought empty began to fill. It was a mix of overwhelming gratitude and a deep, gut-wrenching grief. This was a discovery that would change everything. Atlas had saved a life tonight, a life that was so close to being lost. The red and blue lights of the approaching ambulance were a beacon in the darkness, a swirling promise of hope. Jack held the baby tighter, his heart thumping in his chest, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts in a single, crystal-clear image, the face of his own child. Lost so many years ago? This wasn't just a case. It was something more. It was a second chance he never knew he was looking for. And the knitted cap on the baby's head, a simple, faded red, felt like a silent, mysterious message. The siren's wail was a piercing crescendo in the still night, a frantic cry for life echoing off the glass facades of Havenwood General Hospital. Jack held the baby tight in his arms, his gloved hand a clumsy, large anchor for a life so impossibly small. He moved in a state of suspended reality, the world a blur of flashing red and blue, the rush of cold air, and the distant, garbled voices of first responders. Atlas trotted faithfully beside him, a silent, watchful shadow. The dog's low growl, a protective rumble deep in his chest. was the only thing that felt real and steady inside the emergency room. The chaos was a controlled, frantic dance. White coats and green scrubs swarmed around them. Jack was a statuesque figure in his uniform, a granite rock in a tempest, as a nurse gently, professionally, peeled the blanket-wrapped bundle from his arms. He felt a sudden, profound emptiness, as if a vital piece of him had been ripped away. A doctor, his face a mask of grim concentration, listened to the baby's tiny, rattling chest. "Severe hypothermia," the doctor announced. His voice clipped and urgent. "Core temp is dangerously low. We need to get her on a warming blanket, fast." Another nurse. Her hair pulled back in a neat bun, held a small, plastic bracelet. "Let's call her Jane Doe for now, until we know more." "No." A young, compassionate voice cut in. It was a nurse. Her eyes kind, her face etched with exhaustion. She looked at the frail, shivering infant. "She's not a Jane Doe. She's a miracle." She leaned in, her voice soft. "She looks like a little lily. So pure." The name stuck, Lily, as the medical team wheeled Lily away on a gurney. A chilling silence descended on Jack. The adrenaline from the discovery and the ambulance ride dissipated, leaving behind a cold, heavy feeling of helplessness. He stood there, a police officer in the middle of a hospital, a hero in the eyes of the staff. But in his own mind, a man who had arrived moments too late. He found himself unable to move, rooted to the spot, until a gentle hand on his arm brought him back. It was Officer Miller, his partner. His face a mixture of concern and shock. "Jack, you okay? We've got to file the report. The chief is calling every 5 minutes." "The media is already here, circling like vultures." Jack nodded mutely, but his eyes were on the hallway where Lily had disappeared. The media, of course. The story of a police dog saving a newborn from a frozen alley was a human interest goldmine, the kind of story that sells papers and pulls at heartstrings. Soon, Jack and Atlas would be plastered all over the news, hailed as heroes. But the word tasted like ash in Jack's mouth. A hero. For what he had just been doing his job. He hadn't saved her from the cold, he had just found her after she had already been abandoned. The true hero was Atlas. And even then, their heroism was a hollow thing compared to the tragedy that had placed that baby in the alley in the first place. Later, in a small, sterile waiting room, a social worker approached Jack and Miller. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with bright, intelligent eyes and a posture of professional resolve. Her name was Elena Cruz. She introduced herself with a handshake that was firm and direct. "Officer Corbin, I'm Elena Cruz. I'm with Child Protective Services. I've been assigned to Lily's case," she said. Her gaze fixed on him. "I just wanted to thank you and Atlas personally. You both saved her life." Jack just nodded, his throat tight. He glanced at Atlas, who was now resting his head on Jack's knee, watching Elena with his usual calm intensity. "It was Atlas," Jack said, his voice rough. "He found her." Elena smiled, a genuine, warm expression that momentarily softened her serious demeanor. "He's remarkable. I heard he just veered off your route. What made you follow him?" "I don't know," Jack admitted, the words surprising even himself. He usually had a logical explanation for everything. He wouldn't stop. He was determined. It was like he knew. He knew there was someone in trouble. Elena's expression shifted. She wasn't just hearing a police officer's report. She was listening to a man wrestling with something profound. Her eyes, filled with an empathetic curiosity, moved from Jack to Atlas and then back to Jack. She had seen countless officers in her career cynical, hardened, and detached. But there was something different about this man. His stoicism was a carefully constructed fortress. But she could see the cracks, the raw emotion just beneath the surface. He wasn't celebrating his hero status, he was grieving, and she wondered why. I'm sorry, I know this is a lot to take in, Elena said softly. But I need to get some details. Was there anything else? Any other clues? The knit cap. For example, it's the only thing she was wearing, other than the blanket. Jack's gaze immediately fell to the evidence bag on a nearby table. Inside, sealed and sterile, was the small, red knitted cap. It was cheap, poorly made, and looked handmade. It was so out of place, so personal. In the midst of a crime scene, it's all we found. Jack said, "No note, no other personal items. Just that cap and a thin blanket. We'll run a full forensics analysis, of course, but it may not lead to anything." Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. The mother could have purchased the yarn anywhere. There's no way to know. Jack shook his head, a sudden, powerful conviction taking root in his mind. "We'll find something. We have to." The words were out before he could stop them. Surprising Elena and even himself. It wasn't the detached tone of a police officer talking about an open case. It was the desperate plea of a man who needed a purpose. Elena looked at him, her curiosity deepening. "I believe you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll keep you updated on her condition, and you can come back to visit her if you like. The nurses said you haven't left." Jack felt his cheeks flush. It was true, he had spent the last 2 hours sitting in the waiting room, unable to leave. He had a home to go to, a report to file, a life to resume. But something held him fast to this place, to this hospital, to this fragile life fighting for every breath in the NICU. He was drawn to the sterile, quiet room where Lily lay, an invisible string pulling him closer. He needed to know she was all right. He needed to see her. He needed to make sure she was safe. Later that night, long after the reporters had left and the precinct report was filed, Jack returned. He had changed out of his uniform, opting for a dark jacket and jeans. A deliberate choice to blend in, to become just a concerned citizen. He had told his superior he was going home, but his car had a mind of its own. Turning the familiar route back to the hospital, Atlas was with him. Of course, a silent testament to their shared purpose. He found the NICU on the second floor, a quiet wing where the only sounds were the soft beeps of machines and the rhythmic whoosh of a ventilator. A kindly night nurse recognized him and smiled. "Officer Corbin, good to see you. She's stable, for now. Still critical, but stable. She's a little fighter." She led him to Lily's incubator. It was a clear, plastic box, a bubble of warmth and life. Inside, Lily was so small she seemed to barely exist. A tiny ventilator tube was taped to her nose, and an IV drip was attached to her hand. She was so pale, so vulnerable. Jack's chest constricted with a familiar pain, a deep-seated ache that was as sharp and fresh as it had been years ago. He remembered the day his own son was born. The same tiny, fragile hands, the same innocence. He had held his son for only a few short hours before he was taken away. The memory was a wound that had never healed, a ghost that haunted his every waking moment. And now, seeing Lily, it was as if that old wound had been ripped open. But this time, there was a chance for a different ending. He pressed his hand against the glass of the incubator, the cold surface a jarring contrast to the warmth inside. Atlas, sensing Jack's profound emotion, placed a paw on the base of the incubator, his dark eyes staring at the baby with a quiet, knowing intelligence. It was a silent pact between man and dog. They had found her. Now, they would protect her. They would find the person who did this. Not for a police report, not for a commendation, but for Lily. Because somewhere in that freezing alley, with that whimpering bundle, a hardened police officer had rediscovered a flicker of hope, a second chance to do what he couldn't do before, He would not fail this time. The small, sterile world of the hospital's NICU was a stark contrast to the unforgiving streets outside. But for Jack, it was simply another kind of cold. He found himself drawn to it, a magnetic pull he couldn't explain, let alone resist. In the hours and days that followed the discovery, he became a fixture in the hallway outside Lily's incubator. The nurses came to know him by name, offering tired but knowing smiles as he stood vigil, a silent guardian in his dark jacket. Atlas always at his feet. Jack's life had become bifurcated. During his shifts, he was Officer Corbin, running down leads, filing reports. His mind a steel trap of facts and protocol. But the moment his shift ended, he was simply Jack, a man standing watch over a baby he'd never met. His heart an exposed, vulnerable thing. The media had their field day. Of course, Havenwood's heroes. The headlines screamed, with grainy photos of Jack and a majestic Atlas. But Jack paid them no mind. The accolades felt hollow, an insult to the quiet tragedy of the baby they had found. He spent most of his downtime with Elena Cruz, the social worker. She was a whirlwind of motion and purpose. Her energy a force that Jack found both exhausting and invigorating. She shared every piece of information with him, no matter how small, as if they were a team. She was thorough, compassionate, and unwavering in her belief that the person who abandoned Lily wasn't just a monster. There's a reason, she'd say. Her eyes fixed on the hospital documents. A terrible reason for this. And we have to find it. One afternoon, she approached him with the police report in her hands, her brow furrowed in thought. Forensics came back on the blanket, she said, her voice low. Nothing. It's a cheap polyester blend. Probably from a secondhand store. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. It's a complete dead end. Jack's shoulders sagged with disappointment. He had been clinging to the hope that something, anything, would break. And the cap? He asked, his voice rough with fatigue. Elena held up a clear plastic bag. Inside. The faded red knitted cap sat like a small, sad monument. They found a few hairs, but they're too damaged for DNA, and it's a generic yarn. The only thing of note is the knit pattern. It's a very specific. Tight stitch? Not something you see in mass-produced items. It's handmade. Jack nodded. His gaze fixed on the cap. He knew that. He had seen it the night they found Lily. He had held it. A flicker of an idea. A strange, half-formed thought. Took root in his mind. He looked at Atlas, who was now awake and watching him with an uncanny intelligence. Can you get that cap out of the bag for a second? Jack asked Elena. She hesitated, her professional instincts warring with her trust in him. Jack, this is evidence. It needs to be handled with gloves. I know, he said. Just let me hold it. I have a hunch. Reluctantly. Elena slipped on a pair of latex gloves and carefully lifted the cap from the bag, holding it out to him. Jack didn't touch it. Instead, he simply knelt down, and with a soft command, he urged Atlas to approach. Atlas, he said, his voice a low, encouraging murmur. Find. The dog's ears twitched, his nose immediately going to the cap. He took a long, deep inhale, his body going rigid. The fur on his neck bristled. Then a low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. It wasn't the protective growl from the other night, but something different. Something cold and hard. Atlas began to whine, a sound of frustration and agitation. He pawed at the cap, his nails clicking against Elena's gloved hand, his dark eyes wide with a strange mix of recognition and alarm. What is it, boy? Jack asked, his voice now laced with an urgency that sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Atlas didn't answer with a sound. He jerked his head violently, pulling on his leash. His body now tense with a frantic, desperate energy. He wasn't just reacting to the baby's scent. He was reacting to something else. Something connected to the person who had left her there. Jack's mind raced. He had never seen Atlas behave like this. The dog was a master of his craft, but his reactions were always measured. Clinical. This was different. This was personal. The scent wasn't new to him. It was a memory. A terrible, forgotten memory that was now screaming to be remembered. Elena's eyes widened as she watched the dog's unusual display. He's reacting to something, Jack. But what? Jack straightened up, his face a mask of grim realization. He's not just picking up the scent of the person who left the baby, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He's reacting to the scent of someone he knows, someone he's encountered before. And that scent, he trailed off, his mind racing through the thousands of scents Atlas had cataloged over his years of service. Most were mundane, tied to routine patrols or training exercises, but a few were attached to the most high stakes. High-profile cases of their career. Jack turned to Elena, his eyes now alight with a cold, terrifying focus. I need you to look up some case files for me. We're going off book here. I'm going to need you to trust me. Elena nodded, her curiosity and concern now replaced by an unwavering professional resolve. What case? A kidnapping, Jack said, his voice flat. From 5 years ago, high profile, went cold. The scent? It was a woman, the suspect. He didn't need to say her name. The memory was a scar on his soul, a wound he had been trying to forget for half a decade. The cold case that had ruined him, that had broken him and Atlas in ways no one else could understand. He had to be sure, he had to know if this was a tragic coincidence, or something far more sinister. The possibility that the two cases were connected, that the same person responsible for one tragedy was now linked to this one, was a chilling thought. But the look in Atlas's eyes, the uncharacteristic agitation, told Jack that this was no coincidence. The case file was a thick, dust-covered binder, a collection of dead ends and unanswered questions. Elena found it in the precinct archives, a forgotten piece of history. The victim was a wealthy heiress, a young woman named Clara Vance. She had been missing for 6 months when the case went cold. The primary suspect was a woman named Cassandra Thorne, a brilliant but elusive fugitive who had managed to evade capture. The media had painted her as a ruthless criminal, a master of disguise. She had simply vanished without a trace, and the case was closed as a presumed homicide. As Jack read the file, his eyes scanned the details, the timeline, the forensic reports, and there, buried deep in the notes from a forensics report, was a single, cryptic sentence, trace amounts of a unique aromatic oil, possibly a blend of sandalwood and bergamot, found on a discarded piece of fabric at the scene. The scent of a ghost, the scent that Atlas had picked up. It was the same one he had reacted to tonight. Jack's gut clenched. The pieces were clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening precision. The cold case wasn't cold at all. It was just a frozen thread, waiting for the warmth of a new lead, a baby freezing in an alley, a police dog's impossible memory, and a forgotten scent from a 5-year-old crime. It was a bizarre, surreal connection, a twist of fate that was almost too unbelievable to be true. But Jack knew, with a certainty that was both a terrifying and liberating feeling, that this was no coincidence. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was an unfinished symphony of justice, a haunting melody that had just begun to play. He knew, with an unshakable resolve, that he and Atlas were going to be the ones to finally finish the song. Jack drove with a grim, focused intensity, the city lights blurring into a smear of color outside his window, the memory of the scent on the cap, and Atlas's violent reaction to it was a physical weight in his chest. It had been 5 years since the Clara Vance kidnapping case went cold. 5 years since the name Cassandra Thorne had been spoken in the Havenwood precinct. But for Jack, it felt like yesterday. He pulled into a small, nondescript parking lot near the precinct and cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle huffing of Atlas in the passenger seat. He sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, the ghost of the past rising to meet him. Clara Vance had been a bright, vivacious art student, the only child of a powerful real estate mogul. Her disappearance had sent shockwaves through the city. The initial investigation had been a media circus, a high-stakes, high-pressure case that consumed Jack's life for months. He had been a different man then, still raw from a more personal tragedy. But with a fire in his belly and a belief that he could always find the truth, the primary suspect had been a woman named Cassandra Thorne, a mysterious figure with a knack for disappearing. She had been Clara's art professor, and it was later revealed, her secret confidant. All the evidence pointed to her the last person to see Clara alive. A known history of strange behavior, and a trail of cryptic clues that led to dead ends. Jack and Atlas had been on her scent for weeks. Atlas, a rookie K-9 at the time, had been an absolute prodigy. He had tracked her to an old, abandoned warehouse on the city's waterfront, a place filled with empty canvases and half-finished sculptures. But Cassandra wasn't there. She had vanished, and all they had found was a small, ornate pin, a silver raven, and a single. Discarded scarf, the scarf, to this day, still carried the faint scent of sandalwood and bergamot, a unique, almost exotic fragrance that Atlas had never forgotten. It was the same scent on the baby's cap. The case had a tragic, gut-wrenching end. Months later, a body was found in a remote part of the state. The victim wasn't Clara, but a young woman named Sarah, a close friend of both Clara and Cassandra. She had been brutally murdered. The police had no choice but to close the case, presuming that Clara was also dead, and Cassandra was the killer. The media painted Cassandra as a cold-blooded sociopath, a brilliant fugitive who had gotten away with murder. The case became a scar on the Havenwood PD's record, a testament to a justice denied. For Jack, it was a profound personal failure. He had been the lead investigator when he had been so close. He had promised Clara's parents he would find her. The guilt had haunted him, feeding the deep, private sorrow that had been festering since the death of his own child years before. It was a double blow that had hollowed him out, leaving behind the man he was today, the stoic, detached professional, a man who believed that while he could find the criminals, he couldn't always find the justice. Jack! You okay? Elena's voice broke through his reverie. She had followed him in her own car and was standing by his window, her face full of concern. He lowered the window, the cold air rushing in. I'm fine. You're not, she said, her voice soft but firm. You look like you've seen a ghost. What does this Thorne woman have to do with Lily? Jack sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Cassandra Thorne. She was the suspect in a case I worked on 5 years ago. A kidnapping. It went cold, and Atlas just reacted to the baby's cap the same way he reacted to Thorne's things. It's the scent. He never forgets a scent. Elena's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you saying the woman who abandoned Lily is the same woman who kidnapped Clara Vance? It's a long shot, Jack admitted, but it's the only lead we have. We never found Thorne. She just disappeared? I'll need to see the case file, Elena said, her mind already shifting into professional gear. Every detail, every report. We have to look at this with a new perspective. Something must have been missed. Jack nodded, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about Clara and Sarah and the unfinished business of a case that had haunted him for 5 years. He had failed once, but this time, fate had given him a second chance. He would not squander it. They spent the rest of the night in the precinct's archives, a dusty, silent room filled with the forgotten tragedies of Havenwood. Elena, with a fresh pair of eyes, combed through the files. Jack, with the clarity of a man who had been given an unexpected redemption arc, pointed out the details he remembered, the timelines of the missing persons, the alibis of the suspects, the cryptic notes from the forensics team. Here, Elena said, her finger tracing a line on a report. Clara Vance. A note from her mother's diary. Clara is keeping a secret. A big one. She told me she was in trouble and that a friend was trying to help her get out of it. She mentioned something about a powerful man and a family secret. Jack's heart pounded. This was new. This wasn't in the official report. It had been dismissed as the ramblings of a distraught mother. But in this new context, it sounded like a cry for help. Elena flipped through more pages. Cassandra Thorne, born into a wealthy family, estranged from her father, a senator. She looked up at Jack, her eyes full of dawning comprehension. Senator Marcus Thorne, the same one who's running for governor, the one known for his ruthless political tactics. Jack felt a wave of icy dread wash over him. I didn't know her father was a politician. The report just said, wealthy family. It was 5 years ago. He wasn't as well known then. The pieces began to fit together with a chilling, sickening precision. A powerful senator with secrets. A daughter on the run. A missing heiress. A murdered friend. And now an abandoned baby. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was a conspiracy. There's more, Elena said, her voice a hushed whisper. She held up a page from the file. Clara Vance's last known location was a safe house she was sharing with Cassandra Thorne, a secluded cabin in the woods, just outside of town. The property is owned by a shell corporation. The owner's name is listed as Stone and Thorne Investments. Jack's mind reeled. Stone and Thorne? The names were a cruel, ironic echo. This wasn't a case of a single criminal. This was a family secret. A web of deceit and power that had claimed lives and was now threatening a new, innocent one. The baby wasn't just abandoned. She was left as a desperate act of protection. The knitted cap wasn't just a clue, it was a signal. A desperate plea for help. The stoicism Jack had held onto for so long began to crack. He had always seen the world in black and white, good and evil, right and wrong. But this was a gray landscape of moral ambiguity, a place where a presumed kidnapper could be a terrified hero, and a powerful senator could be a cold-blooded killer. He looked at the file, at the photo of the young, vibrant Clara Vance, and the grim, professional photo of Cassandra Thorne. And he knew, with a sudden, profound certainty, that they had been wrong all along. The case wasn't cold. It had been frozen over by layers of power and deception. But now, with the help of a little baby and a police dog, the ice was beginning to melt. The hunt was on, but this time, Jack wasn't just searching for a suspect. He was searching for the truth. The first light of dawn was a pale, anemic glow seeping through the precinct's grimy windows as Jack and Elena sat hunched over the old case file. Surrounded by a mountain of coffee cups, the initial shock had given way to a chilling, professional resolve. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were now snapping into a terrifying mosaic. Okay, Elena said, rubbing her tired eyes. Let's review. 5 years ago, a student named Clara Vance goes missing. Our primary suspect is Cassandra Thorne, a reclusive artist with a shady past. Simultaneously, Clara's friend, Sarah, is murdered. The case goes cold. Now, we have a baby abandoned in an alley, wearing a hand-knitted cap that Atlas recognizes the scent of. And that same scent is linked to Cassandra Thorne. And the cap's knit pattern is specific enough to be tracked. Jack nodded, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. And we now know Cassandra Thorne is the daughter of a powerful senator who's gunning for governor. We also have a note from Clara's diary suggesting a powerful man and a family secret are at play. It's too many coincidences. Elena held up a photograph from the file. It was a faded picture of Cassandra Thorne, a woman with piercing, haunted eyes and a defiant set to her jaw. And what if she's not the villain? What if she's a victim in this? The question hung in the air. A revolutionary thought that challenged everything Jack had believed for 5 years? He had always seen Cassandra as a cold, calculating criminal, a master manipulator. But what if the media, the police, and he himself had been wrong? What if she had been a protector, not a perpetrator? It would explain Atlas's unusual reaction to memory of someone he had tracked, but also a sense of shared purpose, a hunt for justice. We need to find the source of that cap, Jack said, pushing his chair back. It's the only tangible lead we have. A hand-knitted cap, a unique stitch, that's a story. Someone who knows how to do that, and where to buy that specific yarn. They might remember something. Elena's eyes lit up. Exactly. Most people buy their yarn from craft stores, but a specific stitch suggests a more niche place. Maybe a small, local shop. A place where the owner remembers their customers. The search began with a digital deep dive. They ran a search for knitting and yarn shops in Havenwood and the surrounding suburbs. Most were large chains, generic and impersonal. But there was a handful of smaller, independently owned businesses. Their first target was the Crimson Skyne, an old-fashioned shop on the outskirts of town known for its rare, high-quality yarns and a reclusive owner. It was an old building, smelling faintly of wool and lavender, with bells on the door that jingled a cheerful, old-timey tune. The owner was a small, frail woman with a halo of white hair and a kind face. Her name was Mrs. Gable. She looked at Jack and Elena with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Jack, opting for a softer approach, let Elena take the lead. She explained their situation carefully without revealing the full extent of the case. We're trying to track a family heirloom, a unique hand-knitted cap, she said, showing Mrs. Gable a picture of the cap. The pattern is very distinctive. We were hoping you might recognize it. And perhaps the yarn. Mrs. Gable's eyes, magnified by her thick glasses, scrutinized the image. She ran a gnarled finger over the screen. A slow, thoughtful smile spread across her face. Ah, yes, I recognize that stitch. It's a trellis twist. Not many people have the patience for it. It's my own pattern. Actually, I teach it in my classes. Jack's heart leaped. They had hit a jackpot. Did you ever have a student who made a cap like this? He asked, trying to keep his voice level. The old woman's brow furrowed in concentration. Oh, yes, I had a young woman who was a truly gifted knitter. She came here for a few months last year. She was so quiet, kept to herself, but her hands were always moving. So very fast. She paused, her eyes glazing over with a faraway look. She made a beautiful blanket, too, and yes, a little red cap. She was so proud of it, but also so anxious. She told me she was making it for her niece. Jack and Elena exchanged a glance. Do you remember her name? Elena asked gently. Mrs. Gable shook her head sadly. She never gave me her full name, just Cassie. But I remember what she looked like. She had striking eyes, and she was visibly pregnant when she was here. The word pregnant hit Jack like a physical blow. The baby. It was Cassandra's baby. But wait. Mrs. Gable said she made it for her niece, and the file said Cassandra was a fugitive. It was a dizzying contradiction. A web of lies and half-truths that was becoming more and more tangled. Did she ever mention anything else? Jack pressed, his voice taut with urgency. A family member. Anything that stood out, only that she was in a lot of trouble, Mrs. Gable said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And that she was afraid. She told me she was running from a very powerful man. She was so worried about the baby and about the family she had to leave behind. She paused, her expression turning somber. She also always wore this little pin, a silver raven, on her coat lapel. It was the only thing she ever seemed to wear. Jack's breath hitched. The silver raven. The same pin they had found 5 years ago at the abandoned warehouse. It was the very same one. It was a direct, irrefutable link. Cassandra Thorne hadn't disappeared. She had been in Havenwood all along, hiding in plain sight. She had been pregnant, she had been scared, and she had been running. The pieces fell into place with a sudden, chilling clarity. The baby wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of desperation. The knitted cap was a desperate plea for help, a clue left behind for someone to find, a trail of breadcrumbs in a frozen city. And the name Cassie was just another layer of a masterful disguise. This wasn't a cold-blooded criminal. This was a young woman, terrified and alone, trying to save a baby from a fate worse than death as they left the shop. The sound of the bell chiming behind them. Jack knew their hunt was over. They weren't hunting a fugitive anymore. They were hunting a truth. A family secret that was darker and more sinister than they could have ever imagined. The cold trail had warmed up, and the scent of redemption was now stronger than ever. The information from Mrs. Gable was a critical breakthrough, but it raised more questions than it answered. If the baby belonged to Cassie, and she was a pregnant woman on the run, why would she abandon her child? And who was the powerful man she was so terrified of? All signs pointed to Senator Marcus Thorne, her estranged father. But the motive remained murky. Jack and Elena returned to the precinct, their minds racing. They needed to find a connection between Senator Thorne and the disappearance of Clara Vance. And now, the abandonment of baby Lily. Jack pulled up all available public records on the senator, while Elena began cross-referencing names and dates with the original case file. "Look at this," Elena said, her finger tracing a line on her computer screen. The senator's wife died in a car accident 12 years ago. He has 2 children, Cassandra, the fugitive artist, and a son, Marcus Thorne Jr., who was disowned a decade ago. He disappeared from public life completely. Jack's eyes narrowed. Why was he disowned? The records are sealed. But there are whispers of a scandal, Elena said, her voice low. Something about him not following in his father's footsteps. He was an outspoken critic of his father's business practices. She paused, her eyes widening as she connected another dot. He's also listed as an art enthusiast. He attended the same college as Clara Vance and Cassandra Thorne. They were all in the same social circles. A terrible possibility began to form in Jack's mind, a chilling pattern of connections that was too precise to be a coincidence. Elena, run a background check on Marcus Thorne Jr. See if he's alive, and see if there's any link between him and Clara Vance. The search was long and arduous. Marcus Jr. had done a masterful job of erasing himself from public records. His social media was a ghost town, his professional history a series of dead ends. But Elena was a relentless tracker, and she finally found something buried deep in an old digital archive of a small, local newspaper. The headline was from 10 years ago, Senator's son elopes with college sweetheart. The article was short, a snippet from a society page. The girl's name was Clara Vance. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. Clara Vance wasn't just a friend of Cassandra's. She was Marcus Thorne Jr.'s wife, and she hadn't been kidnapped. She had been on the run. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, her hand over her mouth. The senator, he disowned his son for marrying an unsuitable woman. Clara was an artist, not from a political family. He must have been furious. He must have gone after them. The truth was now a cold, terrifying reality. Clara Vance hadn't been kidnapped. She had been hiding from her own father-in-law, and Cassandra Thorne hadn't been a kidnapper. She had been helping her brother and his wife. The pieces of the puzzle now clicked into place with a sickening finality. Clara was keeping a secret, a big one. She was in trouble and a friend was trying to help her. The powerful man was her father-in-law, Senator Thorne, and the family secret. It was Clara's pregnancy. The baby was the senator's grandchild, but a grandchild he would never acknowledge. A grandchild who would be a stain on his political career. The hunt for Clara Vance 5 years ago hadn't been a search for a missing person. It had been a hunt orchestrated by the senator to find his son's wife and make a problem disappear. The disappearance of Clara wasn't a kidnapping, it was a cover-up. And Sarah, the friend who was murdered. She must have known too much. Jack's hands balled into fists. The guilt he had been carrying for 5 years. The belief that he had failed Clara and Sarah was replaced by a righteous, burning fury. He and the entire police department had been pawns in a political game, manipulated by a powerful man to serve his own cruel ends. "Okay," Jack said, his voice hard as steel. "We need to find Marcus Thorne Jr., if he's alive. He's a key witness. And we need to find Cassandra. She must have had a reason to abandon her own niece. There has to be a piece of the story we're missing." They searched for Marcus Jr. with renewed urgency, knowing he was either in deep hiding or dead. They found a lead in an unexpected place, a small, independent art gallery that Clara and Cassandra had frequented. The gallery owner, a quirky, eccentric man with a fondness for lost artists, remembered both women. He also remembered a third person, a man with a quiet demeanor and a tragic gaze, who would often buy up all of Clara's paintings. He had a different last name, but the gallery owner remembered him by his first name, Marcus. He stopped coming after the tragedy, as he called it, the gallery owner said, his voice full of genuine sadness. He was heartbroken. He told me he was moving far away to start over, but he always kept his art in a storage unit. He called it a piece of her. He said he'd come back for it when the time was right. The gallery owner gave them the address for the storage facility. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. Jack and Elena drove there, Atlas in the back seat, his body tense with a strange, nervous energy. The dog seemed to sense the immense stakes of the moment. The storage unit was a rusted, nondescript box in a sea of identical containers. Jack used his key to open it, and as the metal door scraped upwards, the smell of turpentine and old canvas hit them, a scent that was a time capsule of a life frozen in time. Inside, dozens of Clara Vance's paintings were stacked neatly against the wall, each one a vibrant, colorful expression of a life cut short. In the middle of the room, there was a single dusty chair, and on it, a framed photograph. It was a picture of a younger, smiling Marcus Jr. and a radiantly happy Clara, both of them holding a newborn baby. The baby was Lily. Jack's breath hitched. The picture was dated 6 months ago. Lily wasn't Cassandra's baby. She was Marcus Jr.'s. She was the granddaughter of Senator Thorne. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a horrifying finality. Clara hadn't just been a victim of her father-in-law's greed. She was the mother of Lily, and she had been dead for 6 months. Cassandra hadn't been pregnant. She had been helping her brother and his wife hide their child, just as she had helped them hide themselves for 5 years. But something had gone terribly wrong. Clara was dead, and Cassandra was alone. Now with an infant she had to protect from a powerful man, the web of deceit was now fully revealed. A monstrous, intricate design woven by a man's ambition and cruelty. But at the center of it all, there was a single, terrifying question. Where was Marcus Thorne Jr., and what happened to Clara Vance? The answers, Jack knew, were somewhere in this twisted narrative, and finding them was no longer just about solving a case. It was about honoring the dead and saving the living. The discovery of the photograph sent a shockwave through Jack and Elena. The reality of the situation was far more complex and tragic than they had imagined. Lily was not Cassandra's baby, but her niece, the child of Marcus Thorne Jr. and the late Clara Vance. The case was no longer a matter of a single, desperate woman. It was a multi-layered conspiracy, a political cover-up that had cost a young woman her life and had placed an innocent infant in mortal danger with renewed urgency. Jack and Elena began to hunt for Cassandra Thorne. They were no longer looking for a suspect. They were looking for a witness, a victim, a terrified guardian. The storage unit was a dead end. They had to rely on the faint trail left by the knitted cap and Mrs. Gable's memory. She said Cassie was pregnant. Elena mused as they drove, her mind working furiously. But she wasn't. She was with a baby. She must have been passing Lily off as her own, to protect her from whoever she was running from. Her father, the senator. "And the pin," Jack said, his voice flat. "The silver raven, it was a clue she left for us to find. A signal she was alive, but it was also a way to connect her to her past, a past she wanted to forget." They revisited the old case file, looking for any mention of a property, a safe house, anything that might link Cassandra to the Thorne family. They found it in the notes from a police flyover conducted 5 years ago. A secluded cabin, deep in the woods, owned by a shell company with a registered name linked to the Thorne family. It was the same cabin where Clara and Cassandra had last been seen, the very one Jack had searched and believed to be empty. But now, with a clearer understanding of the truth, he knew it was the first place to look. The drive was long and quiet, the paved roads giving way to a winding, unpaved path that disappeared into a thick forest. The cold was a living thing here, biting at the exposed skin on their faces. Jack and Elena were no longer just a cop and a social worker. They were two people united by a single, desperate mission. Atlas sat in the back, his ears perked, his nose twitching, a silent, powerful presence that was their only real weapon. They found the cabin nestled deep in a clearing, a small, unassuming wooden structure with a plume of smoke curling from its chimney. It was a scene of rustic peace that stood in stark contrast to the violence and betrayal they knew had happened here. Jack's hand went to his service weapon, his senses on high alert. "Stay back," he warned Elena. "We don't know who else is here." He moved silently, his boots crunching on the snow. Atlas, his leash held loosely, led the way, his steps light and purposeful. The dog stopped at the front door, his tail giving a single, soft thump against the wood. It was an unmistakable signal of reassurance, a sign that the person inside was not a threat. Jack took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened slowly, and a woman stood there, her face gaunt and pale, her eyes wide with fear. It was Cassandra Thorne. The 5 years had not been kind to her. Her once vibrant spirit was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified desperation. She was no longer the confident, defiant artist from the photographs. She was a ghost, a survivor haunted by a past that refused to stay buried. She looked at Jack, her eyes full of dawning recognition. "You're the officer from back then, the one with the dog." Jack nodded slowly. "We're not here to arrest you, Cassandra. We're here to help. The baby, Lily. She's safe, but we need to know what happened." Cassandra's body sagged with relief, a profound release of tension. She opened the door wider and waved them inside, her movements slow and weary. The cabin was small but cozy, the air warm and smelling of wood smoke. "I had to leave her," Cassandra said, her voice a reedy whisper. "I had no choice. They were closing in. His men. My father's men." She sat on a small wooden chair by the fire, her hands trembling as she held them out to the flames. She began to speak, her voice gaining strength as she recounted her story. A tale of love, betrayal, and relentless fear. She told them about Marcus Jr. and Clara Vance, their secret marriage, and the birth of Lily. She spoke of her father, Senator Thorne, a man obsessed with power and image, who saw his son's choice of wife and child as a public relations nightmare. He promised them he'd make them disappear, Cassandra said, her eyes welling with tears. But he didn't mean from the public eye. He meant forever. She confessed that she had helped her brother and Clara go into hiding. They had moved from place to place, always one step ahead of the senator's goons. They lived in fear, their only comfort the love they shared for each other and for their daughter. Lily. But 6 months ago, tragedy struck. The senator's men finally found them. I wasn't there, Cassandra said, her voice cracking with grief. I was on a supply run when I came back. The cabin was a mess. Clara, she was gone. My brother, he was there, barely alive. He told me to take Lily and run. He told me the senator's men were coming back for the baby. They knew about her. She was a witness. She was the proof of everything they had done. The full horror of the situation crashed over Jack. Marcus Thorne Jr. had survived the attack, but where was he now? And what happened to Clara? He didn't need to ask. The look in Cassandra's eyes was the only answer he needed. I ran for months, Cassandra said, her voice dropping to a whisper. From town to town, always looking over my shoulder. I was alone. I was sick. I knew I couldn't keep her safe. They had eyes everywhere. They were closing in. I had to make a choice. Leave her where she could be found, or risk them finding her first and finishing the job. Her plan had been a desperate, last-ditch effort. She had chosen a public place, a cold, desolate alley, a location a police officer would eventually find. She had left Lily with a single, recognizable clue: the knitted cap, a direct link to her, a trail she hoped the right people would follow. She knew the risk she was taking, that she would be seen as a monster, a cold-hearted criminal, but she also knew it was the only way to save her niece. She was a master artist, and this final act was her masterpiece, a work of sacrifice, a calculated risk to ensure justice. As she spoke, a sudden, sharp rap echoed at the door. Cassandra's eyes went wide with terror. They found me, she whispered, her face ashen. I told you, they have eyes everywhere. Jack's mind went into overdrive. He looked out the window, his eyes scanning the tree line. He saw two figures, their faces obscured by the shadows, moving with a silent, purposeful stride. He pulled Elena and Cassandra behind him, his hand on his weapon. This wasn't an arrest anymore. It was a rescue mission. The final chapter in a story that had begun in a freezing alley. With a desperate act of love, the sound of the knocking became more insistent. A series of hard, rhythmic thumps that echoed the pounding of Jack's own heart. He knew who was on the other side of that door. They weren't police. They were the senator's enforcers. The ghosts who had haunted Cassandra for months. The air in the cabin grew thick with a palpable tension. A sense of impending doom. Back door, Jack whispered, his voice low and commanding. He pointed to a small wooden door at the back of the cabin. It's our only way out. Move. Cassandra, her face a mask of terror, grabbed Elena's arm. We can't. There's a ravine behind the cabin. It's a dead end. We have no choice, Jack said, his hand now firmly on his service weapon. He turned to Atlas. Atlas, stay with Elena. Protect her. The dog, sensing the profound danger, let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the front door, just as the men on the front porch began to kick at the door. The back door creaked open. A gust of cold wind rushed in, carrying the scents of pine and wet earth. A figure stood in the doorway, his silhouette a dark, imposing shape against the pale light of the moon. Jack! A voice rasped. It was Marcus Thorne Jr. He was a ghost. Gaunt. Pale. With a bandage wrapped around his head and a fresh scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He looked like a man who had gone through hell and come out the other side. But just barely. You're alive, Jack said. The word's a mixture of relief and astonishment. Barely, Marcus said. His eyes on Cassandra. They've found me. I barely escaped. But they know I'm here. They know you're here. My father. He wants this to go away. He wants the last bit of evidence. Lily's bloodline. Gone. The full, horrific picture was now complete. Senator Thorne had not only killed Clara Vance, his son's wife, but he was now trying to murder his own son and his own granddaughter to protect his political ambitions. The man was a monster, a man who saw his family not as people to be loved, but as problems to be eliminated. The front door splintered under the force of the kicks. It wouldn't hold for long. We have to go, Elena said, her voice trembling. They'll kill all of us. The ravine, Cassandra said, her voice firm. It's the only way. I know the path. Jack looked at the ravine. A sheer drop in the darkness. It was a perilous, suicidal path. But he knew, with a certainty born of desperation, that it was the only way they would get out of this alive. Stay behind me, Jack ordered, his voice a low, commanding growl. He pushed the back door open, allowing Marcus to slip in, his movements slow and pained, just as they moved towards the ravine. The front door burst open. Two large men, their faces grim and determined, stepped into the cabin. Their eyes swept the small room, their gazes landing on Jack, Elena, and Cassandra. One of them, a man with a cold, merciless smile, raised a weapon. Thorne said to make it quick, he said, his voice a flat, dead tone. Clean. Jack didn't hesitate. Atlas, he commanded, distract them. The German shepherd, a creature of boundless loyalty and intelligence, did not need a second command. He let out a ferocious bark, a sound that was less a threat and more a terrifying promise of a brutal confrontation. He shot towards the men, a blur of muscle and black fur. His movements a symphony of precision and fury. He wasn't attacking to kill, he was attacking to disable. He lunged at the first man, knocking the weapon from his hand with a swift, powerful move. The man stumbled back, his face contorted in shock and pain. The second man, distracted, turned his attention to the dog. It was the opening they needed. Go, Jack yelled. Now! He pushed Elena and Cassandra forward, Marcus Jr. following them. His movements slow and agonizing. They plunged into the darkness of the ravine. The cold, wet air of the forest a suffocating presence around them. The path was treacherous, slick with ice and hidden rocks. Cassandra, fueled by a primal need to survive, moved with an almost supernatural speed, guiding them with a haunted, practiced ease. Behind them, the sounds of the struggle in the cabin faded into the night. Jack knew Atlas was a capable dog, a fierce defender, but he was a dog. He couldn't fight them off forever. Jack turned, taking aim at the cabin with a single, well-placed shot. He took out the fuse box. The cabin plunged into darkness. The two enforcers now blind, their advantage gone. They scrambled down the treacherous path, their lungs burning, the cold air searing their throats. They could hear the men yelling, their voices a distant, furious echo in the night. The ravine was their only protection, a natural barrier that would take time to navigate. At the bottom of the ravine, they found a small, frozen stream. It was their only escape route. They had to follow it out of the forest, towards the road. Jack knew this part of the country. There was a small, two-lane road a few miles away. If they could get there, they could call for backup. Call for, I have a phone, Marcus Jr. said, his voice weak. He fumbled in his jacket, pulling out a small satellite phone. It's all I've been using. I knew they were tracking me. He handed it to Jack. It's for my father. I've been recording him. Everything, his confession, his plan, the whole thing. Jack's eyes widened. A direct confession. The truth. It was all there, on a small encrypted device the piece of evidence that would bring down a senator and his criminal enterprise, the ultimate proof that would clear Cassandra's name and ensure Lily's future. But as they moved, a sudden, blinding light cut through the darkness. The senator's men. They had split up. One of them had found a way to a small overlook. His face a grim, determined mask as he raised his weapon. "It ends now, you worthless traitors," he snarled. Jack instinctively pushed Elena and Marcus to the ground, shielding them with his body. He knew he couldn't take on the man with a hostage in tow. He couldn't risk a single life. He was a cop. He had to protect them. And then, a sound. The unmistakable sound of a dog. A furious, desperate cry that was part snarl, part bark. It was Atlas. He had found them. He had followed their scent, the scent of his human family in danger. And he was a storm of righteous fury. He lunged at the man, his movements a blur of vengeance. The man, surprised, stumbled, his shot going wide. Atlas knocked the weapon from his hand, and the man went down. Jack didn't wait. He and Elena scrambled to their feet, grabbing Marcus and Cassandra, and they ran. They ran with a new purpose, a newfound strength born of the knowledge that they were not alone. Atlas had their back. He was more than a police dog. He was a guardian angel, a four-legged beacon of loyalty and hope in a dark, unforgiving world. The race against time was not yet over, but for the first time in months, Jack knew they were going to win. The satellite phone was a fragile, miraculous thing in Jack's hand, a direct line to justice in a world of deceit. As he, Elena, Marcus, Cassandra, and Atlas emerged from the forest, their bodies bruised and weary. The first rays of morning light painted the sky in streaks of pink and orange. The cold, unforgiving night was over, and with it, the relentless, suffocating fear that had been their only constant companion. They had managed to get a few miles down the road before a passing driver, a kind-faced truck driver, spotted them and, seeing their tattered state, offered them a ride to the nearest gas station. From there, Jack made the call to his captain, a man he had not spoken to on a personal level in years. "Captain, it's Corbin," Jack said, his voice flat with exhaustion but firm with purpose. "I've got a situation. We've got a live witness in the Clara Vance case, and a recording that implicates Senator Thorne in a high-profile murder and conspiracy." There was a long silence on the other end, a pause of disbelief. "Corbin, are you sure the senator is holding a press conference this morning? He's on a national stage." "I'm sure," Jack said, his gaze fixed on Marcus Jr., who was now sitting on a bench, his head in his hands, his body racked with a quiet, profound grief. His son, Marcus Thorne Jr., he's alive, and he has a confession from his father. We need to act now. This whole thing started with a baby in an alley. It's time it ended with justice." The captain's voice was still laced with skepticism, but something in Jack's tone, something in the sheer audacity of the claim, convinced him. He gave Jack the green light. A full tactical team was dispatched to a secure location where they would meet Jack and his group. Meanwhile, back in the city, the media frenzy was at its peak. The senator's press conference was a highly publicized event, a carefully orchestrated display of political power and moral authority. He stood on a stage, surrounded by his supporters, his face a mask of calm confidence. As he spoke about his commitment to family values and his vision for the future, he spoke about his opponents, about their smear campaigns and dirty politics, all the while knowing his hands were stained with his own family's blood. Just as he was reaching the climax of his speech, a police car, its sirens blaring, screeched to a halt at the foot of the stage. Two officers stepped out, their faces grim and professional. One of them, a detective Jack had worked with for years, walked directly to the podium. "Senator Marcus Thorne," the detective said, his voice amplified by the microphone. You are under arrest for the murder of Clara Vance and the attempted murder of your son, Marcus Thorne Jr., and your granddaughter. The scene erupted into chaos. The reporters, their cameras flashing, shouted questions. The senator's supporters roared in outrage, but the senator himself, his face drained of all color, said nothing. He just stared at the detective, a look of shocked, utter defeat on his face. Just then, Jack and Elena, with Marcus Jr., Cassandra, and Atlas, walked through the crowd. Jack held up the satellite phone, a small, unassuming piece of plastic that held the key to the senator's downfall. He nodded to the detectives, a silent, powerful acknowledgement. Marcus Jr., his face still bearing the signs of his brutal ordeal, walked onto the stage, his gaze fixed on his father. "Dad," he said, his voice full of a raw, broken sorrow. "You're a monster. You killed my wife. You tried to kill me. And you left my daughter to die in a freezing alley." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. The senator's facade crumbled. He lunged at his son, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. But the detectives were ready. They subdued him, his struggles pathetic and weak against their practiced movements. As he was led away in handcuffs, his once powerful voice was reduced to a series of incoherent, furious shouts. Justice was served, not in a courtroom, not in a quiet, solemn proceeding, but in the public eye. On a stage built for a man's political ascension, it was a raw, visceral moment of reckoning, a public takedown that would be replayed on news channels for years to come. As the chaos began to subside, Jack and Elena stood together, watching the scene unfold. Cassandra, her face streaked with tears, looked at Jack, her eyes full of gratitude. She wasn't just a fugitive anymore, she was a witness, a victim, a survivor, and Atlas, the true hero of the hour, sat quietly at Jack's feet, his gaze fixed on the retreating police car. He hadn't just found a baby, he had found a conspiracy. He hadn't just saved a life, he had brought a powerful, corrupt man to justice. The truth, as it so often does, had been hidden in plain sight, a story of love and betrayal, of family secrets and desperate choices. It had been a long, dark journey, a relentless hunt that had taken them down a path filled with ghosts from the past. But at the end of it all, there was light, there was hope, and there was a tiny, fragile baby named Lily, who was waiting for her new life to begin. In the aftermath of the press conference, the world seemed to hold its breath, processing the astonishing truth that had been revealed. The story of the abandoned baby and the heroic police dog was no longer a simple human interest piece. It was a front-page expose on political corruption and a family's descent into depravity. The media, which had once hailed Senator Thorne as a paragon of virtue, now tore him apart with righteous fury. The public was outraged, a collective shock that a man who had sold himself as a champion of family values was, in reality, a cold-blooded monster. For Jack, the chaos was a distant, muted echo. He was no longer a part of the grand drama. His duty was done. He had found the truth, and he had brought the right people together to expose it. Now, all that mattered was the resolution. He and Elena drove back to the hospital. A quiet, somber journey. Marcus Thorne Jr. had been taken to a secure location, where he would receive medical attention and be debriefed by law enforcement. He was a broken man, but with the hope that his daughter was safe. A flicker of his old self had returned. Cassandra, who was now a key witness in the prosecution against her father, was also being held in a secure facility. Her past as a fugitive was now understood for what it was, a desperate act of survival. Her face, once a mask of fear, now held a look of profound relief. The heavy burden of her secret finally lifted. When Jack and Elena arrived at the hospital, they went straight to the NICU. They found Lily's incubator, now glowing with a soft, warm light. The nurses smiled at them as they approached, their faces filled with a quiet admiration. Lily, no longer cold and unresponsive, was now a tiny, vibrant life. She was still in critical condition, but the doctors were optimistic. She was breathing on her own, her tiny lungs filling with the air of a world that was no longer a threat. She's a fighter, that one. The night nurse, the same one who had first called her Lily, said softly, "She's getting stronger every day. A true miracle." Jack pressed his hand against the glass, a gesture of silent comfort. He felt a deep, profound connection to this child, a bond forged in a freezing alley on a desperate night. She was the reason he had found the truth. She was the catalyst for a chain of events that had finally, after 5 years, brought justice to a cold case as he stood there, watching her sleep. Elena came and stood beside him, her hand, warm and gentle, rested on his arm. "What will happen to her?" he asked, his voice low. "Child Protective Services will take her in." "Of course," Elena said, her professional tone returning. "We'll find a foster family, a good one that understands her unique circumstances." She paused, her gaze softening. "And when the time is right, after all the legal proceedings are over, we'll find a permanent home for her, maybe with her uncle. If he recovers, or if not, a new family, a loving family." Jack nodded, his heart swelling with a quiet, fierce protectiveness. He knew that Elena would see to it. She was more than just a social worker, she was a guardian, a fierce advocate for the children who had no one else. Later, in the quiet solitude of his apartment, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He was no longer the haunted, emotionally distant man he had been for years. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long, long time. The memories of his own lost child, once a source of endless pain, now felt different. They were still sad, but they were no longer a prison. They were a part of him, a part that had, in a strange and beautiful twist of fate, allowed him to see the truth and save another life. He looked at Atlas, who was curled up at the foot of his bed, a silent, comforting presence. "We did it, boy," Jack whispered. "We really did it." The dog's tail thumped softly on the floor. It was a simple gesture, but for Jack, it was everything. Atlas wasn't just a partner, he was a lifeline. He was the one who had felt the truth in the air, the one who had refused to give up on a life he had never even met. Their bond was more than just a partnership. It was a friendship forged in the crucible of tragedy and redeemed by the pursuit of justice. The story was over, but a new chapter was just beginning. For Lily, who would get a second chance at life? For Cassandra, who would get a chance at redemption? For Marcus Jr., who would get a chance to heal and, hopefully, to be a father to his daughter? And for Jack, who had found his purpose in the most unexpected of places, and had, in the process, found a way to heal his own broken heart. The freezing alley had not just been a place of tragedy, it had been a place of miracles, and the true hero of the story wasn't a man, but a dog, whose loyalty and uncanny instincts had not only saved a baby, but had brought a whole web of deceit crashing down. The legal proceedings that followed were a whirlwind of motions, testimonies, and media scrutiny. Senator Marcus Thorne's political career was over, his public image shattered, and his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and inhumanity. Marcus Jr.'s testimony, backed by the recorded confession on the satellite phone and Cassandra's harrowing account, was the final, devastating nail in his father's coffin. The senator, faced with overwhelming evidence, finally crumbled, his hubris replaced by a cold, bleak silence. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, a fate he had so callously tried to inflict upon his own family. For Cassandra, the path was more complex. The prosecution, seeing her role as a protector rather than a perpetrator, offered her a deal. She would serve a short sentence for obstruction of justice and for her role in helping her brother hide from the authorities. After all, a crime had been committed, and justice had to be served. However, her sentence was minimal, a testament to the incredible bravery she had shown in a desperate situation. She would have a chance to rebuild her life, to reconnect with her brother, and to one day be a part of Lily's life. As for Marcus Jr., he was given a clean slate. The charges against him were dropped, and his role in the affair was seen as a tragic consequence of his father's monstrous actions. He was a survivor, a witness, and now, a father. He had lost his wife, Clara, but he had found his daughter, Lily, and in that, a new reason to live. The day came when Lily was finally strong enough to be released from the hospital. The media, still enthralled by the story, was there in force, but Jack and Elena had worked to ensure her privacy. A quiet, unassuming foster family. The Millers. Were there to meet her? They were a kind, gentle couple who had heard about the story and had felt an immediate, profound pull to help. They promised Elena they would give Lily a loving, stable home, and that they would keep in contact with Marcus Jr. and Cassandra when the time was right. Jack watched from a distance, a small, private smile on his face. He saw the Millers hold Lily with a tenderness that was so much more powerful than all the fame and recognition in the world. He saw a future for her, a future filled with love and warmth. A stark contrast to the cold, lonely alley where her life had almost ended. Elena stood beside him, her hand on his arm, her eyes filled with tears. "She's going to have a good life," she whispered. "She deserves it," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. He'd always been a man of action, a man who believed in the tangible. But watching Lily leave, in the arms of a family she didn't know, he realized that sometimes. The greatest acts of courage were those of quiet kindness. He looked at Elena, and in her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own purpose. She was not just a social worker, she was a force of good, a person who had, with her unwavering compassion and relentless spirit, helped him find his way back from the brink. Their shared mission had created a unique and profound bond between them. They were an unlikely pair, the stoic, hardened cop and the compassionate, determined social worker. But they had faced down a powerful conspiracy together. And in the process, they had saved a life and, perhaps, saved each other. The day after Lily was placed with her foster family, Jack found himself back in the precinct. The world had returned to its normal rhythm, but for him, nothing would ever be the same. He was no longer the man who had lost everything. He was the man who had found something new to live for. The memories of his past were no longer a haunting ghost. They were a quiet, powerful reminder of the preciousness of life and the unshakable strength of hope. His first assignment after the case was a routine patrol with Atlas. The snow had melted, and the city was a bleak, gray landscape under a cold, spring rain. They drove in silence for a while, the familiar quietness of the car a comforting presence. But Jack was no longer just going through the motions. He was looking at the city with a new perspective, his eyes searching the shadows, his heart open to the possibilities that lay hidden in the forgotten corners of the world. He knew that somewhere, in the darkness, there was always a light to be found, and he knew that he and Atlas would be there to find it. Later that day, Elena called him. "Jack, I have some news. Marcus Jr. is doing much better. He asked to see us. He wants to thank you." And Atlas. Personally, Jack smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. I'll be there, he said. The promise wasn't just to see Marcus, it was a promise to himself, a commitment to a new life, a new beginning. He had a family now, an unconventional, unexpected one, forged not by blood, but by a shared belief in justice and a single, extraordinary moment of courage in a frozen alley. And at the heart of it all was a baby named Lily, who had a new chance at life, a chance at a future filled with love and happiness, all thanks to a man who had been broken and a dog who had refused to give up on a silent, whimpering bundle in the dark.